You're listening to part 85 of our series, 7 Medicines, The Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio. Hello, Susan, and welcome to Time Monk Radio.
Hi, Gemini. It's always such a delight to be with you and to watch the seasons pass and to see all of the different things that are happening, all of the different plants, and even more, I am coming to appreciate all the same plants. It's like, oh, yes, there's that plant. It blooms now. How nice. And that whole sense of how nature cycles around and around. I'm coming very much to appreciate that. So the cycle that we have been exploring here for these many years, in fact, is the cycle of the 7 medicines. And we are in the last medicine. We're in high-tech medicine. And we've been, just prior to this show, looking at tests that use radiation. And, of course, whenever we say tests that use radiation, everyone immediately thinks X-rays. And that's true. X-rays, absolutely. But in medicine, it's not just X-rays. In fact, there's a whole branch called nuclear medicine. And nuclear medicine includes X-rays, like mammograms, which are X-rays, and dental X-rays, and X-rays for a broken bone. But it also includes CAT scans. It also includes the implantation of radioactive pellets in certain places in the body, most usually the prostate, but in other areas sometimes as well. It also includes the application of radiation to an area of the body where there's cancer in the hope to destroy that cancer. So nuclear medicine is a big deal. Oh, yes, and there's also, we give people things to inhale, inject, or swallow that are radioactive so that we can then use a photon emission computed tomography, PET, or SPECT, to illuminate a specific organ, tissue, or system. To make the point, there's a lot of radiation that you can be exposed to in high-tech medicine, both through testing, which will expose you to radiation, and through the direct application of that radiation itself. So I think it wise for us to take a look at how to protect ourselves from that radiation, how to get through that. Before we get into the specifics, I wanted to mention a couple of articles that have come up recently. One with a great headline, Women Over 70 Getting Unneeded Radiation for Breast Cancer. And the conclusion of research on a database of 40,583 women older than 70 who were treated with lumpectomy in the first 10 years of this century, from 2000 to 2010, and they found that more than 2/3 of those women received some form of radiation therapy. And a majority of those older women with early breast cancers continued to be told they needed radiation despite evidence that it's not useful to lower recurrence rates in women of that age. In fact, more treatment for early breast cancer isn't necessarily better, said the study. Radiation therapy, which is routinely suggested, increases the risk of rib fractures, heart damage, and radiation-induced cancers. And this article, Radiation for Breast Cancer Linked to Narrowing of the Coronary Arteries. Women who undergo breast-conserving surgery, that's a lumpectomy, for early-stage breast cancer are usually told that radiation therapy is a necessary part of that treatment. Radiation kills cancer cells that are left behind after surgery, and it helps to prevent them from causing a recurrence or metastasizing. In a study published in The Lancet involving more than 10,000 women treated with breast-conserving surgery, radiation cut their 10-year recurrence rate by 1/3 to 1/2. Numerous studies, however, have found that mastectomy is no less effective than lumpectomy plus radiation. The main downside of radiation is damage to the heart. Several studies have found that women who receive radiation for breast cancer have an increased risk of heart disease and death from cardiac problems. It's of special concern for women with breast cancer in the left side of the body because, of course, the heart is mostly on the left side. It's hard to say how much is really connected here because it usually takes at least 10 years after the exposure to the radiation for the heart disease to manifest, and many times at that point, women and doctors are not necessarily linking those two things. A new study has found that women undergoing radiation for breast cancer have an increased risk of stenosis, which is narrowing of the coronary arteries, and they receive radiation along with the breast tissue. Stenosis can block blood flow to the heart and actually cause a heart attack. And this is certainly a theme in high-tech medicine. And that's why it's our last medicine. Because while high-tech medicine can certainly give us information and can certainly help in sometimes miraculous ways, high-tech medicine also carries with it the risk of severe damage, lifelong consequences, and even death. Radiation exposure is vastly higher and more dangerous than most people realize. This is from a recent article in a scientific magazine. And interestingly enough, they're not talking about Fukushima. They're talking about medical tests. As many as 30,000 cancers are caused each year as a result of tests using radiation in modern medicine. That's a lot of cancers. We're causing 30,000 cancers a year in order to get some information. This is why there are 7 medicines, and this is the last one. Radiation produces free radicals that damage DNA and the structure of the cell. It is important, says this article, never to undergo any study that uses radiation in any way without checking and double-checking if it is truly necessary. For instance, perhaps you're being told that you need to do a CT scan after a cancer diagnosis to check for metastases. That's certainly something that can be done. And it is something that modern medicine views as absolutely necessary. But is it necessary for you? If those metastases were found, what would you do? How would things be different? We're all different people. So really, Don't just ask the people, is this a necessary thing? Don't just ask the doctors, is this necessary? Ask yourself, is this test necessary, and what am I going to do with the results of this test? All right, then. One of my favorite herbal buddies, Donnie Yance, talks about what happens when we receive radiation therapy. And he reminds us that first and foremost, it causes inflammation. It causes an increase of systemic free radicals, and radiation causes the spread of cancer. So, again, we ask ourselves, is this necessary? I suggest to women who've had a lumpectomy, who have breast-conserving surgery, that they really ask themselves if they need that radiation, and to understand that while they're being told it will kill any remaining cancer cells, it also is creating cancer at the same time. Adaptogens not only shield healthy cells from radiation and protect the entire body from the lethal long-term negative effects of radiation, including the initiation of secondary cancers and the spread of existing cancers. Adaptogens actually enhance the cancer-killing effects of radiation. So if you're using radiation as a treatment for a cancer, the adaptogenic herbs that we're going to be talking about as ways to protect yourself against radiation can be used along with that radiation therapy. This is what we really mean by integrative medicine. That this is medicine where we integrate herbal medicine, massage, and all of the other medicines, Reiki and so on, that we have access to, while we are using high-tech medicine if we need to use high-tech medicine. And some of us may in fact decide that, yes, the best thing to do is to fight fire with fire and to use radiation. Adaptogens act as selective cancer cell radiosensitizers. They actually increase the cancer-killing effects of radiation through a multitude of mechanisms. They potentiate the pro-oxidative radiation-damaging effects more selectively against cancer cells and protect healthy cells. Remember that one of the definitions of adaptogens is that they are herbs that normalize functioning. So they are herbs that bring up what is down and bring down what is up. So this is not unusual to hear that adaptogenic herbs can both shield healthy cells from the bad effects of radiation while increasing those bad effects of radiation against the cancer cells themselves. Donnie Yance continues, Panax Ginseng specifically has demonstrated a protective effect during radiation therapy in many studies and has been shown to reduce cell damage caused by gamma rays, especially damage to DNA, while at the same time supporting repair and regeneration of cells that had been damaged by radioactivity. People who are not even using radioactivity in medicine, who are not getting radioactive tests, but who are concerned about radiation in the environment, have also been suggesting that ginseng is one of the easiest ways to make sure that you are protected from the increasing load of radiation that is in the environment. Ionizing radiation interacts with living tissues to release massive amounts of reactive oxygen and nitrogen. The result is massive free radical damage, especially to DNA. When the genes that regulate cellular proliferation are damaged, the result is cancer. There are plants that provide impressive protection against these ionizing radiations. They include specific vitamins, trace minerals, polyphenols, and specific plants themselves. We will look at these plants and plant extracts and find out how to shield ourselves from the dangers of medical radiation. So, I want to look at polyphenols. And polyphenols are a class of compounds, and that means that they are found in a great many plants. What do polyphenols do? They modify gene expression, specifically in the genes that turn on to protect tissues from ionizing radiation. Thus, polyphenols are perhaps one of the most important ways to protect ourselves against the detrimental impact of radiation. Some examples of polyphenol are resveratrol, quercetin, and catechins. These polyphenols are very well studied and have been shown to be potent radioprotectors. Resveratrol is both radioprotective of healthy tissue and has anti-tumor activity. Resveratrol also protects chromosomes from radiation-induced damage, and it prevents radiation toxicity to the liver and small intestines, two tissues that are most immediately sensitive to radiation's ill effects. If you read about health and health foods, you probably already know that resveratrol is found in grapes, especially in wine, we are told. But it turns out that the amount of resveratrol in grape juice is about the same as the amount in wine, and of course we are told that it's in red wine. And although there is more resveratrol in the skin of the grapes, it turns out that white wine has a goodly amount too. In fact, there's a great many products out there now that will give you supplements of resveratrol, but I would prefer, if I was worried about radiation, to simply include in my diet a glass of any kind of wine or a glass of grape juice to get that resveratrol. Quercetin protects fats and proteins from radiation because they are very powerful antioxidants. They provide chromosomal radio protection, especially shielding mitochondrial DNA from oxidation damage. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. There are more than one mitochondria. Quercetin also ameliorates biochemical changes in white blood cells following exposure to radiation. So like the resveratrol, the quercetin and the related compounds to quercetin are not just protecting us against radiation, but acting as adaptogenic substances that can go into the body and find the tissues that need the help and offer it there. The best sources of quercetin. Well, quercetin is named after Quercus, the oak, and oak bark is certainly one of the very best sources of quercetin. But oak bark tea is hardly drinkable. Oak bark is used to tan hides, and it feels like it's tanning your tongue. It's filled with tannic acid. So usually quercetins in the diet are gotten through apple skins and onion skins. That means for me that I make my own applesauce, and I cook those apples with the skins on them. Of course, before I freeze or can the applesauce, I do mill it so that the hard parts of the apple and the hard parts of the skin are milled out so the applesauce is smooth. But all that quercetin has now been cooked into the applesauce, and it's pretty stable with heat. As for onion skins, every once in a while, I pick up a handful of the onion skins from the bottom of my onion crock, throw them into a pot with some carrot ends, celery tops, a little salt, cook it up, and make a vegetable broth, which I can either drink just like it is or freeze and use the next time I make a soup that will be loaded with quercetin. There are other polyphenols, such as epigallocatechin, gallate, and the catechins were originally seen in tea, especially green tea. And green tea has been extensively studied, and it protects animals from whole-body radiation, blocks lipid oxidation, and prolongs the lifespan of animals exposed to radiation. Green tea protects rapidly reproducing cells in the intestines and the hair from the damaging effects of radiation. All right, some easy ways to protect ourselves. Drink grape juice or wine. Make your own applesauce with the skins in it, and or make your own vegetable broth with onion skins, and enjoy a cup of green tea or regular tea whenever you're concerned about radiation. If I was being exposed to radiation on a regular basis, I would do these things on a regular basis. In Japan, I was introduced to matcha, and while I had certainly had green tea, I had never had anything like matcha, which is the green tea leaves, which are actually dried and then very finely powdered. And they are whisked into the hot water. And so when you are drinking your green tea, you are actually ingesting the entire leaf. And because of that, the levels of catechins that you get go way up. What else besides these things can be used to help protect us against radiation? Whether it's the radiation from meltdowns of nuclear power plants, the radiation of nuclear medicine, or the radiation from tests. Well, I was very surprised to find out that there's a compound in soybeans which has remarkable radioprotective effects, and its name is genistein. It's an isoflavone, and it has been found to protect mice from ionizing radiation injury after one dose. That's right. They give mice one dose of genistein and then expose them to radiation, and they are protected against that radiation. Now, notice that most of the things that we are talking about are radioprotective. And what that means is that it is better to do them beforehand. In other words, better to protect yourself from the rain than to put your umbrella up after you've gotten thoroughly wet and complain that you are wet. These protective things generally need to be used beforehand. Genistein stimulates production of red and white blood cells following whole body radiation, and again after as little as one dose. Genistein is especially good at protecting the rapidly reproducing blood stem cells in bone marrow, which are incredibly vulnerable to radiation's effect. Right now, genistein is under intensive study by the military as a way to protect against potential nuclear threat. Soybeans also contain a radioprotective enzyme inhibitor called the Bowman-Burke inhibitor, or BBI. BBI activates the genes that repair DNA, and it is perhaps the most valuable compound for late or even post-exposure treatment of radiation toxicity. So while most of the things we're talking about work best if they're taken beforehand, soybeans also have an effect when taken afterwards. In a typical multi-targeted fashion of plant compounds, BBI also stabilizes enzymes that would otherwise produce radiation-induced arrest of cell growth. Remarkably, BBI enhances survival of healthy cells, but not survival of cancer cells, especially those that have been exposed to radiation. BBI survives processing. It is found in soy milk and soy protein isolate. So soy protein isolate is in so many foods that we're probably all ingesting some small amounts of it, but how easy. It's a lot to drink. About a glass of soy milk, a glass of grape juice, some applesauce, and a cup of green tea go a long way toward protecting us from nuclear medicine. There is a growing body of scientific evidence showing that plants protect our bodies from radiation. One of the ones that I am sure you've heard of is turmeric. Oh, but maybe you hadn't heard that it was a radioprotective plant. Perhaps you merely heard that it was an anti-inflammatory. Well, remember back to what Donnie Yen said, what does radiation do? Radiation causes inflammation. Right, of course. When we get radiated by the sun, we call it a sunburn. Radiation causes inflammation, and any anti-inflammatory will help protect us against the effects of the radiation. The active ingredient in turmeric is curcumin, and curcumin protects normal tissues from radiation, but upregulates genes responsible for cell death in cancer cells, enhancing their ability to be destroyed by radiation. The result is that there is increased survival of animals exposed to high-dose radiation when they are given turmeric. Now, my question, and I would hope your question, is when? And basically, what we're seeing is a reduction of damage. And so it looks to me like turmeric is something that could also be taken afterwards. Golden milk is gaining some popularity, and so the turmeric can be put in the soy milk, and now we are really talking, helping ourselves to deal with the effects of tests or treatments that radiate our bodies. Turmeric is one of the spice lilies. It has a knobby rhizomous root, And if that makes you think of ginger, ginger is another one of the spice lilies. And ginger, of course, is a wonderful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory. Garlic is not a spice lily, but it, too, turns out to be radioprotective. So before that radiation treatment, eat some fried rice with garlic and ginger in it. Garlic protects the red blood cells from radiation damage, and it prevents radiation damage to chromosomes. Garlic also downregulates X-ray-mediated increases in inflammation, and ginger helps to protect the lipids in your body. That's not all, but our time is up for this week. Next week, we're going to continue to look at ways to protect ourselves from radiation. Green blessings.
Thank you, Susan, for joining us here at Time Monk Radio. And this concludes part 85 of our series, The 7 Medicines the Wise Woman Way, with Susan Weed at Time Monk Radio.